DJ and PK, it's 97.5 The Zone. We're joined by Andy Bailey, NBA writer and analyst for the Bleacher Report. Andy, good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming back on. We figure you have now had a few Summer League games, and you've started to form opinions of the Jazz young guys. Now, obviously, 3 guys were in the league a year ago, and they've added 3 more rookies here. And I'm curious, if you had to rank them, if you were starting your own team, and you could get any one of those guys, which one would you take right now? Only one.
Ooh, that's tough. Out of the 6 that they've gotten in the last 2 years, I know that we have a pretty minuscule sample at this point for this particular guy, but I would probably go with Cody Williams. Just the versatility. I've always been a sucker for guys with multi-positional skill sets. I think he's a guy who can reasonably play at 2 or 3 different spots. I think there's some playmaking outside there. I don't know if we've seen a ton of it to this point, but I do think he has that in his game. He's a solid shooter who I think could become a really good shooter. For much of the history of the league, really, really good teams have been headlined by wings, and I think that's a factor here too. So I think I would probably go Cody Williams, but if given the chance, I'm sure I could make a case for other guys too. I mean, they suddenly have a pretty intriguing young core here to build with.
Yeah, but I think the bigger question is then, would you take Cody Williams or Bronny?
Man, that's going to be a real head-scratcher.
No, it's not. It's crystal clear. I think that's an awesome story because I think right now at every high school in America, there are at least 50 dads who suddenly have something in common with LeBron. They overvalued their kid's talent.
Well,
and why wouldn't you? You're the dad. Of course you did. Yeah. If you don't, who else will?
Yeah. When my one of my older brothers was a varsity coach here in Cheyenne, Wyoming for years and years, and I saw a lot of what you just alluded to, and I had this brilliant business idea, and maybe somebody in Utah will steal it now. But I was going to set up a consulting firm where coaches, high school coaches from all over the country, just hired me to come in and explain to the parents that your son is not that good.
Easy street. That's the kind of job you just do for 1 year. You take all the cash, then you sell the business, and you are retired, my man.
Exactly. Yeah, I need to get on an LLC or something, but yeah.
So I'm on a push of watching Summer League, obviously, because it's what we do for work. So I'm watching these games. And, yeah, I try to look for bright spots because, you know, you're talking to fans of the team and you just don't want to crap on their team and it sucks and blah, blah, blah. If for no other reason, they'll switch the dial. So we want these teams to win. I'm sure you can understand that. And I am getting excited. I've been excited about Cody Williams. DJ can attest to. I told him before the season started at College Hoops, I said, watch this guy. So I've been pumping him all season long, and they've got the kid and see what he can do. But I'm a little, I guess I don't know the word, would be nervous that they banish these guys to the G League. And I get you got to earn your minutes and all that stuff. But for me, and get your thought on it, is that, and I want to see them play in the big leagues. And, yeah, if they're not ready, well, okay, they're not ready, but let them get ready, you know, and to destroy the confidence. And I know Kobe Bryant's the extreme example, but he shot air balls here in Salt Lake City when he was a pup, and we all know what he did. So unleash him, man. What do you think?
Yeah, I've always been more of a proponent of on-court development. I think the more in-game, and when I say on-court development, I mean in the NBA, and I think the more reps they can get there, the better. And certainly there is some value to going down to the G League and getting reps there and being able to, potentially be more successful against those guys than you are against NBA defenders. Maybe it's a confidence-boosting thing. But I think even that's a balance because there's at least some kind of a stigma with being sent down to the G League. So that could be a confidence hindrance as well. So for years and years, I've typically been if you are on the road to being bad or being mediocre, you might as well play the young guys and see what you have and let them develop a little chemistry together let them get those on-court reps, and maybe that's part of the argument to trade some of the veterans on this Jazz team, is to open up those minutes. I mean, if you're a coach in the NBA, your goal is always going to be to win. I mean, you look better when you win. So if given the opportunity, I think Will Hardy is going to play guys like Markkanen and John Collins, and Colin Sexton isn't really a veteran, but he is compared to the rest of this young core. He's going to want to get as many wins as possible, and that's understandable. But the better thing for the long-term future might be getting those 6 guys on the floor as much as you can, and see if 2 or 3 of them hit, sooner than later.
You didn't just pick 2 or 3. You think 2 or 3 are going to hit, and you think the others aren't. Please explain.
Well, I think that's just an odds thing. The chances of hitting on 6 straight draft picks is pretty low. It'd be an interesting thing to go back through history and see who had sort of the best draft streak. But even if you emerge from 2 straight years with 3 guys who are high-level rotation players, and maybe one of those 3 is a star, you've done pretty well. And then if the result of this season is a better lottery pick in a draft class that's supposed to be a lot better than this one was, then you're really kind of on the path to something. So if Kyle Filipowski is this interesting, versatile, can pass a little bit big man, and Cody Williams develops into what we've already talked about he could be, and maybe Keontae George keeps flourishing as sort of a shoot-first guard, and then all of a sudden you add Cooper Flagg to that mix, suddenly the team's pretty dang interesting in a couple of years.
Yeah, for sure. What's your price for Markkanen?
I've gotten this question a few times. I was on a Warriors podcast maybe a couple weeks ago, and he obviously doesn't speak for the front office, but the host is Sam Esfandiari. He knows the team very, very well, and he was basically willing to give up every draft asset they had.
Really?
And if I'm the Jazz, I don't even know if I'm super hung up on Brandon Pinsky if they're willing to do that. I mean, if you get 4, 5, 6 draft picks and or swaps for Markkanen, that's really hard to turn down given where the team is. And every time I say this, I couch it by also saying I understand the other side of this argument. And there are some days when I think it's probably the smarter path to keep Markkanen. I mean, he's not that old. He does seem to enjoy being in Utah, and really talented guys like that. I mean, he's a fringe All-NBA player. They don't always just fall into your lap. And so if they want to continue to be like a low to mid to high 30s win team, keep hoping for hits in the middle of the lottery and kind of build that way, I think there is some justification there. But if I'm in the front office and a team like Golden State is offering me that much draft capital, I would be real tempted to say yes. And if they can get him to budge on Pinsky, I guess, reportedly that's the hang-up right now, and I kind of understand that too. I think he's a pretty versatile guard, another guy who can play multiple positions, another guy who has pretty good feel for the game. If Golden State eventually relents, I wouldn't be surprised if we see that move made.
Half a dozen draft picks, I'm very interested. I guess the question to answer, and maybe they've already answered, is how quickly are these Jazz guys going to develop? Because historically, you got to be 26, 27, 28 before you're really ready to win. Well, these guys are all 19 and 20. Markkanen isn't going to be very useful in 6, 7, 8 years. I'd be surprised if he's still at that elite level. But we have seen some guys, and maybe we've seen a few more lately, who are ready to win 22, 23, 24. They're actually pretty good. Markkanen is still in his prime at that point. How much does that shape your thought on the trade? How quickly these young guys are ready to go?
Yeah, I think that's an important consideration, and I think that sort of tips the scales towards trade, because I would lean more towards your first take that it's probably going to be 25, 26 before they're ready to win at a real high level. But those proponents of keeping Markkanen could counter and say, well, if these guys show flashes before they're 21, 22, then you can package a couple of them and maybe a couple of the picks from Utah's very deep stash and add another star to Markkanen. that, we heard earlier in the summer, and who knows how serious he was, the whole big game hunting comment. That's going to be on the table for the Jazz for the foreseeable future because they got such big hauls for Mitchell and Gobert. So there are a bunch of different paths Danny Ainge could go down. And maybe it's the way I lean with a lot of young teams. Frankly, when I see a lot of young talent, I want to see which ones are good. And so my natural inclination is play all these guys, trade the veterans, and see what you got. And that can be kind of a vicious cycle to get into if none of them do turn into stars. But that's kind of where my head is at on the whole situation right now.
Yeah, you look at these teams that are off the radar a little bit and need to build through their own, and go with OKC as a classic example. And Denver's done that to a degree too. Also, they've made another bunch of moves, and OKC looks like they're set up to win and drafted well. But they were able to get what would you say, an underrealized, underappreciated player who's turning into a star, and that's SGA. And they've done it with Markkanen to a degree. I'd put SGA a little bit higher just because he's playing in a winning environment. Do you think that Ainge can pull that off again? Because if he can pull that off again and find somebody somewhere who's on the verge of being a star, but he's either too young or the situation isn't right, and if you got that type of player, gave up some picks, combined with the players you've already drafted, then I think you're onto something.
Yeah, I think that's a very viable path. And I think the two teams you identified are really good examples of how it's good to be smart, obviously, as a front office, but to be really good, to become a title contender almost every single time, it takes luck. Because nobody imagined SGA when the Clippers traded him to the Thunder would become a top 2 MVP finisher within 4 or 5 years or whatever it's been. I guess it's been 5 years. His trajectory, not even the Thunder could have seen that coming. And then obviously with Jokic, nobody thought that the number 41 pick in the draft would be a 3-time MVP. And Utah, to a degree, can claim a little bit of luck with Markkanen because I don't think anybody expected him to be quite what he's been for Utah. I mean, he was a solid player with the Cavs and the Bulls, but he had bona fide all-NBA cases for part of the last 2 seasons. So maybe they've already gotten a bit of luck there, and they can get sort of an unrealized asset, as you described it, which I think is a perfect description. And maybe one of these 6 draft picks are that guy, because none of them were picked in the top 5, obviously. Some of them have already had their value depreciate over the course of their basketball lives. Like Cody Williams, Kyle Filipowski, and Isaiah Collier were all top 5 high school prospects in their respective classes, and they, by the time they were drafted, were not considered that anymore. So maybe their pedigree sort of shines through again as they develop with an NBA team as opposed to a college system. So you have to take big swings as a front office, and a lot of them are going to miss, but you'll have a few that hit better than you expected, and that's typically how teams become really, really good, is they have one that just sort of outperforms expectations.
Under that whole theory of front offices are trying to play chess, not checkers, and in sports talk radio and blogs and podcasts and whatever else, tweets, people are mostly playing checkers. We mostly examine the next square in front of us.
Yep.
But I've read a fascinating thing, and I think the Jazz are trying to do this, that yes, you're trying to build a team now. Yes, you're trying to build a team in 3 or 4 years. But I think the rest of the league is looking at what Denver went through. And they're the best example, most recent, but they're not the only one. That you get a team, maybe the Warriors to a degree, you get a team, you draft well, and now it's time to pay your guys. Well, you got to pay your guys the max so you lose them, but you've got the collective bargain agreement just won't let you pay 3 guys. I guess Oklahoma City was the first team to go through it. They traded Harden when Harden, Westbrook, and Durant looked like they could dominate the league for a decade. And they traded Harden because of the financial penalties. So now the theory is, yes, right now the Jazz are trying to identify 3 stars, but they're also trying to build up resources so that inevitably when they can't pay all 3 and they have to move one, they still have a chance to draft in the first half of the first round, presumably they'll be good and be drafting 25th. And they can do a pick swap with Minnesota or Cleveland or the Warriors or whoever and get another player the way the Lakers got Kawhi and extend the thing out 5 more years. Now, they haven't spelled it out that precisely, but when they say they want to open a championship window and keep it open, it doesn't feel like the Nuggets championship window is staying open despite the greatness of their best player. So maybe they have to move Markkanen if they're going to build up the picks so that their peak isn't confined to 2 to 3 years because they can't pay everybody.
Yeah, I think there's something to everything you just said there. It's especially in the new collective bargaining agreement with all these different aprons and taxes and all this stuff we got to learn about. It's borderline impossible to keep an organically built team together for more than, I'm going to say, like 2 or 3 years. Like we'll get a better view of how impactful this CBA is over the next few years, and the rising cap may change that a little bit. I mean, the cap's going to keep bumping up year
10%
after year after year.
every single year thanks to the new TV deal.
Yeah. So, I mean, maybe it's not going to – this very well may be the harshest it ever feels is this summer. But when we start seeing the max contracts 5 years from now, they're still going to take up the same percentage of the cap. Mm-hmm. So it's teams are going to be squeezed, and teams are going to have to be very forward-looking to keep the title window open, as you said. And Denver, there was a big profile on their general manager in the Ringer towards the end of last summer, and he was very open and honest about his philosophy that they were going to have to hit on first-round picks. And if their window is going to be open, some of those guys that they've taken in the last couple of years have to be ready. Like Christian Brown is probably going to be a starter for them this season, and if he's ready to be that, they can be a contender, and if he's not, it's going to be a lot harder for them. So it puts a lot more importance on the draft. I think over the next couple of years, we're going to see maybe some more guys who have a couple of years of experience taken. I think hoarding of picks is something that's going to be a prioritization of a lot of front offices. Like there are going to be different approaches to how to, survive under this CBA, but it's something that every team's going to have to figure out, including the Jazz. So if, again, we keep mentioning these 6 guys, and best case scenario, if 4 of them turn out to be really good players, you probably can't pay all of them, and you're back to the drawing board or back to the draft to find guys who'll fill out your rotation. So the NBA has wanted, I think, increased parity for years and years and years, and they've found a very, very complicated way to do it, but I think they are doing it.
Angel Reese or Caitlyn Clark?
Oh, man. I don't know if you saw this, but somebody asked me to do one of my blind polls on them it's probably been a couple weeks ago now, and Angel Reese actually won it, which was surprising to me. And it's probably just because Caitlyn Clark's turnover numbers were so high.
Yeah, because her teammates can't catch the ball.
Exactly. And you can't tell that from my little silly blind polls on Twitter, obviously. But even when I first saw the results, I think I said something afterward. This is one of the rare occasions where I actually disagree with the poll because her playmaking is pretty crazy, and that's something that I value at any level of basketball, is people who can be offensive engines and make other players better. And she had 19 assists last night.
Yeah, record setting. She's a rook.
She's a spectacular playmaker and potentially a game changer. I mean, I could probably take potentially off.
I think you can.
She can change that league. They just got a big new media rights deal. I think it's like 4 times the value of their rights.
They rolling in it now, man.
200 mil per year.
Yeah, that's my way of saying I'll go with Clark, and I honestly don't think it's all that close. And one of my this is going to sound mean, but one of my favorite things to track right now in basketball is Angel Reese's field goal percentage. It's I think people put too much weight on Clark's turnovers and not enough on Angel Reese's missed shots in that poll. So I'm going to go with Clark.
I think Clark is a combination of Bird, Magic, and Steph Curry.
You don't see any Kobe in that game
praise.
at all, huh?
Now
Can you
back off a
sprinkle in
little
some
bit.
Steve Nash in there?
Yeah, what the heck? Why not?
Might as well.
All right, Andy, we appreciate it. As always, you keep watching those Jazz young guys, and when the front office inevitably makes some kind of trade, I got to believe there's something coming.
I agree.
You can't go from big game hunting to nothing.
Yeah, I agree.
Drew Eubanks, fellas.
From big game hunting to nothing.
He is big. I'll give him that.
Yeah, and he plays a game.
You can't go from. All right, I'll stop. We will bother you again, Andy. Please hold a spot in your future schedule for us.
Okay. I always enjoy coming on. Thanks,
All
guys.
right, thanks. Andy Bailey, NBA writer and analyst for Bleacher Report right here on The Zone. DJ and PK, it's 97.5 The Zone. 9 o'clock slackers, you get up to speed next. Stay with us.